Hey Reddit, I'm Jake, 32, and I never thought I'd be the guy writing a post like this. Honestly, this is probably the hardest thing I've ever had to admit, even to myself, but I guess here we are. This story is about the biggest mistake I ever made, like the kind that flips your entire world upside down, messes with your head and heart in ways you don't see coming. It's messy, painful, and yeah, full of moments that caught me completely off guard. So buckle up, because this ride is anything but smooth. For years, I thought I had it all figured out. A steady job at a tech company in Seattle, a great girlfriend named Emily, a cozy apartment that felt like home, and this sense that life was heading in the right direction. But deep down, there was always this nagging feeling, like something was missing or I was running away from some truth I didn't want to face. One stupid night, after a work party where I definitely drunk way too much, I did something I still regret with every fiber of my being. I texted Rachel, a girl from college who I hadn't talked to in years, someone who always felt like a secret, like a spark I'd never really explored. We started chatting, laughing, joking, and before I knew it, I was outside her apartment at 2 a.m., heart pounding and brain screaming, "Don't do this." But I did. We crossed a line that I'll never take back, not because of love or anything romantic, but because I was selfish, scared, and looking for some kind of escape from my own life. The morning after was brutal. Shame hit me like a freight train. I tried to pretend nothing happened, kept it buried deep, but Emily noticed. She said I was distant, distracted, and every time she looked at me, I felt like a liar staring back. For a while, I thought I could carry this secret alone. But secrets don't stay hidden forever, especially when they're tied to late-night texts that I foolishly didn't block. One day, Emily picked up my phone and saw Rachel's messages. That's when everything blew up. The confrontation was like a hurricane. Emily was furious, her voice shaking with betrayal, her eyes cold and broken. I tried to explain, but my words felt empty, like a kid caught stealing cookies. She yelled, she cried, and between the chaos, I saw everything I'd built with her start to crack. Then, in a twist I didn't expect, Emily told me she wasn't innocent either. She showed me messages from another guy she'd been talking to behind my back. The ground beneath me shook harder. Suddenly, it wasn't just my mess, it was ours. The emotional roller coaster that followed was insane. Days bled into nights filled with silence, anger, tears, and conversations that ended with more questions than answers. I felt like I was losing both myself and the woman I loved. I kept asking, how did we get here? Were we doomed from the start? Could we ever fix this? In the middle of all this chaos, I realized I had to make a choice. Fight for Emily and us, or walk away and accept the wreckage. It wasn't easy. I started seeing a therapist, something I never thought I'd do. I reconnected with friends I'd shut out. Bit by bit, I began picking up the pieces of who I was and who I wanted to be. Emily and I went to couples counseling, but every session was a battle. Forgiveness wasn't something you just decided on. It was a slow, painful journey. Months passed. Sometimes we found moments of hope, a smile, a touch, a quiet dinner. But other times, the past slammed back at us and nearly tore us apart again. Through it all, I learned that mistakes don't just hurt others, they change you. They force you to look in the mirror, face your flaws, and grow in ways you never expected. So here I am, still trying, still healing, still learning. If there's one thing I want to say to anyone going through something like this, it's that mistakes don't have to define you. How you respond, how you fight to be better, that's what matters. Thanks for reading this mess. More to come. After that night, everything spiraled faster than I could keep up with. The guilt was suffocating, but it wasn't just the guilt, it was the chaos that followed that crushed me. Emily stopped talking to me for days, then sent me messages that were half questions, half accusations, and full of pain. I tried to respond, but the words tangled in my throat like knives. Every time I saw her face, I saw the disappointment, the hurt, and I hated myself for causing it. But then, just when I thought it couldn't get worse, Emily dropped a bombshell. She confessed she'd been texting another guy, a coworker from her job, for months. She said she never met him outside work but that the emotional affair was real. That hit me like a gut punch. Suddenly, we were both broken and tangled in lies we'd spun around ourselves. My phone blew up with texts from Rachel too. Angry, confused, maybe even hurt. She wanted to talk, to explain, but I was drowning. I stopped sleeping. Work became a nightmare because every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, their words, the mess I'd made. Friends took sides. Some told me to fight for Emily. Others said she wasn't worth it, that I should just walk away and save myself. I felt completely alone in the middle of a storm that kept roaring louder. Then came the late nights filled with tears and shouting, moments when I wanted to scream, "Why us? Why now?" But no answer came. I started therapy, meeting with a counselor who forced me to dig into my own failures, to admit that I'd been running from myself for a long time before the cheating even happened. That part was the hardest. Facing the ugly truths I'd buried deep, like my fear of being vulnerable, my selfish need for escape, and my failure to communicate. The hardest part was telling Emily I was going to fight, but I didn't know how, that I wanted to rebuild us but wasn't sure if she did. Slowly, painfully, we began couples counseling, but it was brutal. Old wounds reopened, words we'd never said came crashing out, and sometimes it felt like we were digging graves for each other instead of building bridges. One night, after a particularly awful session, I nearly gave up. But then Emily looked at me with tears and said, "I don't want to lose what we had. But it's going to take everything." That was a turning point. We agreed on no more secrets, no more lies. Total honesty, no matter how painful. That wasn't easy. There were moments when the past would drag us down, when I saw Emily's doubt in her eyes or she caught me looking distant and wondered if I was still lying. But little by little, the walls began to crumble. I reconnected with Rachel briefly, not to reignite anything, but to close the door properly. That conversation was raw and messy but necessary. Meanwhile, Emily and I started spending time just talking. No distractions, no defenses. It felt like learning to speak all over again, but every small breakthrough gave me hope. I still wrestle with the scars of my biggest mistake. Sometimes they sting so much I want to crawl back into that dark place. But I'm learning that healing isn't linear, that forgiveness is a process and not a moment. And most importantly, I've learned that my biggest mistake didn't end me. It forced me to start over, to grow up, and to fight for something real. I don't know what the future holds for Emily and me, but I know one thing. I'm not the same person I was before that night, and maybe that's the only thing I can control. Thanks for sticking with me through this. More to come if you want. Things didn't get easier overnight. Far from it. The moment I thought we were making progress, life would throw a curveball that knocked me right back down. One of those moments happened just a few weeks after we started therapy. I got a call from Rachel at midnight. She was frantic, scared, and honestly, I wasn't sure if I wanted to pick up. But something made me answer. She told me she'd lost her job and was basically spiraling. She wanted to meet up, to talk, maybe even just to scream and cry in front of someone who knew her story. I was torn. I knew getting involved was dangerous, that it might undo everything Emily and I were trying to build back up. But I also felt responsible for her in some weird way, like I'd broken something in her that no one else could fix. So I met her. That night was a mess of old wounds opening wide. Rachel was broken but still fierce, angry at me, angry at herself, angry at the whole world. We talked for hours, about mistakes, regrets, and how sometimes pain makes you do things you never thought possible. I left feeling raw, vulnerable, but also strangely hopeful. But the fallout was immediate. Emily found out I'd met Rachel and flipped. She accused me of betrayal all over again, said I was playing a dangerous game with our future. I understood where she was coming from, but I also felt trapped between the past and what I wanted for us. It was like walking a tightrope without a safety net. Meanwhile, at work, things weren't going well either. My focus was shot, and my boss noticed. I got a warning, which only made me spiral harder. One night, after a particularly bad day, I drove home and crashed into a light pole. No one was hurt, but it was a wake-up call. I couldn't keep living like this, running from my mistakes and hoping they'd just disappear. I had to face everything head-on. Around this time, Emily and I had a huge fight that nearly broke us for good. Words were thrown that neither of us could take back, and for a moment I thought it was over. But then, out of the wreckage, we found a sliver of understanding. We realized we both needed to heal individually before we could heal together. We agreed to take some space, but promised to keep communication open. That space was terrifying and necessary. I spent weeks in therapy, digging into parts of myself I'd avoided for years. Insecurities, fears, my need to control everything. I started journaling, trying to make sense of the chaos inside. Emily did the same. Slowly, we started talking again, cautiously, like strangers learning to trust each other. Then, out of nowhere, Emily's dad got sick. That threw everything into chaos again. I showed up at her parents' house, not sure if I was welcome, but desperate to support her. Watching her navigate that pain made me see a side of her I'd almost forgotten. Resilient, loving, scared, but still standing. That experience brought us closer, and for the first time in months I felt like maybe we could really heal. But healing doesn't erase mistakes. Every day was a test of patience and forgiveness. I still woke up some mornings feeling like I was drowning in guilt, like I didn't deserve a second chance. Yet, every small step forward reminded me that growth comes from pain, and sometimes the biggest mistakes are just the beginning of a new story. So here I am, still broken, still trying, still hoping. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough for now. Thanks for listening. More when you want it. The months that followed were a whirlwind of highs and lows that felt like an emotional roller coaster with no brakes. I tried to hold on to the hope Emily and I could rebuild, but every time I thought we'd made progress, something would unravel it all again. Our relationship was like walking on a thin wire stretched over a canyon of mistrust and resentment. One night, out of nowhere, I got a message from Emily that made my heart stop. She told me she found a letter I'd accidentally left in my jacket pocket. The letter was from Rachel. It wasn't a love letter or anything romantic, but it was full of raw emotions and regret, and it tore her apart. Emily confronted me with tears in her eyes, asking why I'd kept that letter if I truly wanted to move on. I wanted to explain, but I just froze. That letter was a reminder of everything I'd done wrong, everything I was still trying to make right, but to her, it was proof I was still holding on to the past. Things spiraled again. Emily shut down emotionally, became distant, and started questioning every word I said. I felt powerless and desperate, like I was watching the woman I loved slowly slip away. Then came the moment that changed everything again. My mom got diagnosed with cancer. Suddenly, my world wasn't just about me and Emily. It was about family, about facing mortality and the fragility of life. Balancing hospital visits, therapy, and trying to salvage my broken relationship was overwhelming. Emily and I barely had time to breathe, let alone heal. The stress pushed us to our limits, and we had fights that left us both exhausted and heartbroken. But through the chaos, something unexpected happened. We started leaning on each other more, sharing fears and hopes that we'd never voiced before. One night, after a long day at the hospital, Emily told me she wasn't sure if she could keep holding on, but she wasn't ready to give up yet either. It was honest and raw, and it made me realize that maybe that's what love really is. Messy, imperfect, and stubborn. I started to open up more too, sharing my own doubts and insecurities, and for the first time in months, I felt like we were truly connecting. But healing wasn't linear. There were days when I'd catch Emily staring off into space, lost in thought, and I knew she was battling her own demons. I wasn't perfect either. There were moments when my anger and guilt bubbled to the surface and caused cracks in our fragile peace. I had to learn patience, forgiveness, and how to keep moving forward even when the path was unclear. One of the hardest lessons came when I realized that sometimes love isn't about fixing everything but about accepting that some wounds might never fully heal. It's about choosing to stand together anyway. Our therapy sessions became a lifeline, sometimes painful, sometimes hopeful, but always a place where we faced the truth, no matter how ugly or uncomfortable. Emily surprised me by suggesting we start a journal together, writing letters to each other about our feelings, our fears, and our hopes. It was awkward at first, but it helped us communicate in ways words spoken aloud couldn't. As the seasons changed, so did we. There were moments of laughter and tenderness that reminded me why I fell in love with Emily in the first place. We took small trips, cooked meals together, and tried to find joy in everyday moments. I still think about that night, the biggest mistake, every single day. But now, it feels less like a curse and more like a painful lesson that shaped who I am. I don't know what the future holds for us, but I know I'm committed to facing it with honesty, humility, and love. Thanks for sticking with me. More soon. The weird thing about life is that just when you think you've hit bottom, it somehow manages to dig even deeper. After months of clawing back from the wreckage, I thought Emily and I were on a steady path, but the universe had other plans. One morning, I woke up to a text from Emily that said simply, "We need to talk. Now." My heart dropped. I knew it wasn't good. When she finally showed up at the apartment later that day, she looked tired, like every ounce of hope had been drained out of her. She told me she'd been offered a job in another city, hundreds of miles away, and she was seriously considering taking it. It hit me like a punch in the gut. All the progress, all the fights, all the therapy sessions. Was it all just leading to this? A fork in the road that might mean the end? We argued for hours, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. She said she needed a fresh start, away from all the pain and memories that haunted us. I argued that we could rebuild here, that running away wouldn't fix anything. But deep down, I knew she was right in some ways. Sometimes the hardest thing is knowing when to hold on and when to let go. That night, after she left, I sat alone in the dark, thinking about all the mistakes I'd made and how they'd spiraled into something I couldn't control. I thought about Rachel, about the nights lost in regret, and about the woman I'd hurt the most. It was a crushing realization. My biggest mistake didn't just change me. It altered the course of 2 lives, tangled us in a web of what-ifs and could-have-beens. The next few weeks were a blur of packing, phone calls, and awkward goodbyes. Friends and family tried to offer support, but I felt more isolated than ever. The apartment felt empty, haunted by memories and echoes of happier times. I started throwing myself into work to avoid the crushing loneliness, but no amount of overtime could erase the hole in my chest. Then came a surprise visit from Emily. She was back for a weekend, and even though we hadn't fully talked about the future, there was this fragile thread between us that hadn't snapped yet. We spent the weekend walking around the city, revisiting old spots, sharing awkward laughs, and trying to remember who we used to be. But the shadow of our mistakes was never far behind. On Sunday night, before she left again, she pulled me aside and said something that caught me off guard. Maybe some mistakes are meant to teach us how to love better, not how to give up. Those words stuck with me. They were both comforting and painful, a reminder that healing isn't about forgetting, but about growing. I realized that no matter where life took us, the past would always be part of our story, but it didn't have to define the ending. As Emily boarded the plane, I felt a strange mix of hope and fear. The future was uncertain, but maybe that was okay. Maybe the biggest mistake in my life wasn't the end. It was the start of something new. Thanks for reading. More to come. What happened next was something I never saw coming. After Emily left for that new city, I thought I'd finally have the space to heal and figure myself out. But instead, I felt lost, untethered, like a ghost drifting through my own life. The apartment felt like a museum of memories, every corner reminding me of what I'd lost and what I might never get back. Work became both a refuge and a curse. I buried myself in projects, meetings, endless emails, anything to avoid the silence that screamed louder than anything else. But no matter how busy I got, my mind always circled back to Emily and the wreckage of our past. One evening, out of the blue, I got a message from someone I never expected, Rachel. She said she was moving back to town and wanted to catch up. I was hesitant, scared that reopening that door would just bring more pain. But maybe, deep down, I was looking for closure or redemption, or maybe just a connection with someone who understood the mess I was in. We met at a quiet coffee shop, the kind of place where people talk quietly and secrets linger in the air. Rachel looked different, tired but more grounded. We talked for hours about everything and nothing, about mistakes and regrets, about what we'd lost and what we still hoped for. That conversation was raw and messy, but it gave me a strange kind of peace. Rachel wasn't a solution, and I wasn't looking for her to fix anything. But hearing her story and sharing mine reminded me that pain connects us in unexpected ways. Around the same time, I started therapy sessions again. This time with a new therapist who pushed me to face not just the past but the person I wanted to become. Those sessions were brutal. I had to confront my selfishness, my fears, and the ways I'd sabotaged not just my relationship but my own happiness. Slowly, I began to understand that the biggest mistake wasn't just the night I cheated. It was all the times I'd ignored the signs, shut down instead of communicating, and let fear rule my choices. Emily and I stayed in touch, slowly rebuilding a fragile friendship, but neither of us rushed into anything. We were both broken in different ways and needed time to heal separately before considering a future together. One of the hardest parts was learning to forgive myself, something I never thought possible before. I had to accept that mistakes don't erase your worth, but they do demand responsibility and growth. I started reaching out to friends I'd pushed away, rebuilding connections I'd neglected during the chaos. Slowly, the isolation began to fade. But life didn't wait for me to be ready. Just as I was starting to feel grounded, I got a call that my mom's cancer was progressing faster than anyone expected. Suddenly, I was thrust back into the harsh reality of mortality and family struggles. Emily and I found ourselves leaning on each other again, supporting one another through hospital visits, tough conversations, and moments of fear. It was a reminder that even broken people can find strength together, even if the path is uncertain. Looking back, I realized that the biggest mistake of my life set off a chain reaction that forced me to grow, to face uncomfortable truths, and to redefine what love and forgiveness really mean. I don't know where Emily and I will end up, but I know that I'm trying to be better, not just for her but for myself. Thanks for following along. More soon. I never thought I'd admit this, but at some point, amidst all the chaos, I realized I was holding onto hope like a lifeline, even when everything seemed to be falling apart. Emily and I weren't back to normal, and maybe we never would be, but there were moments, fleeting, fragile moments, where I felt like we could still find something worth fighting for. It wasn't easy. Every day brought new challenges. Trust was broken, shattered into pieces, and rebuilding it was like trying to put together a 1,000-piece puzzle without the picture on the box. Sometimes I'd catch Emily staring at her phone, hesitating to reply to a message, and my mind would spiral into worst-case scenarios. But then I'd remind myself that we were both scared and healing in our own ways. One night, we had a fight that seemed like it would end everything. It started small, an argument about something silly, really, but it quickly escalated into years of pent-up anger and disappointment pouring out. Emily accused me of not being present, of running away from my problems, and I fired back about her emotional distance and secretive behavior. We said things we didn't mean, but the raw honesty was necessary. After the storm passed, we sat in silence, the weight of what had just happened settling between us. That night, I realized that healing wasn't about avoiding pain, it was about facing it together. We made a pact to be brutally honest from then on, no matter how uncomfortable or ugly the truth was. Therapy sessions became a battlefield where we fought for our relationship, but also a safe space where we could finally be vulnerable. Outside of that, I started to rebuild myself piece by piece. I joined a support group for people dealing with betrayal and addiction to distraction, things I hadn't even realized I was struggling with. Opening up to strangers was terrifying but strangely freeing. One of the hardest moments came when I had to confront how my own upbringing shaped my fear of vulnerability. I grew up in a family where emotions were bottled up, where weakness was punished with silence or judgment. Breaking that cycle was painful but necessary if I wanted to be a better partner. Meanwhile, Emily started exploring her own journey too. She took classes, made new friends, and began rediscovering who she was outside of us. It was bittersweet but inspiring to watch. We were both learning that love isn't about possession. It's about growth, freedom, and respect. Then, life threw us another curveball. Emily's dad's health took a sudden turn for the worse. I flew down to her hometown to be with her family during the crisis. Watching Emily navigate her pain with such strength and grace was humbling. It reminded me why I fell in love with her in the first place. During those long hospital nights, we talked openly, shared fears, and promised to keep fighting for each other, no matter what. That experience changed the way we saw our relationship. It wasn't just about us anymore. It was about family, resilience, and hope. I still carry the scars of my biggest mistake. Some days, they sting like fresh wounds. Other days, they're dull reminders. But I'm learning to live with them, to let them fuel my growth instead of dragging me down. I don't know where this road will lead, but I'm committed to walking it honestly, with an open heart. Thanks for being here. More when you want it. Life's a funny thing. Just when you start to think you're making progress, something completely unexpected happens to shake your foundation all over again. For Emily and me, that moment came out of nowhere, like a punch to the gut that left me gasping for air. We'd been slowly rebuilding, fighting through the mistrust and pain, learning to communicate in ways we never had before. I thought we were finally starting to find a fragile kind of peace. Then one night, my phone buzzed with a message that felt like it came from the past, a ghost I thought I'd laid to rest. It was from Rachel. I hadn't heard from her in months. She wrote that she wanted to meet, to talk one last time before she left the city again. My heart raced with a mix of dread and curiosity. Should I see her? Was it closure or a mistake waiting to happen? I told Emily about it, trying to be as honest as possible. She was quiet for a long time, then said, "If you want to go, I won't stop you. But I don't want any secrets." That was the first time in a long time I saw a flicker of trust in her eyes. I met Rachel at a park bench under the fading sun. She looked different. More grounded but still carrying the weight of our shared history. We talked about everything. The mistakes, the pain, the ways we'd both changed. That conversation was raw and messy, but it gave me a strange sense of peace. But the next day, Emily was distant again. I caught her scrolling through old messages on her phone, and when I asked about it, she broke down, saying she was scared we'd never fully heal. The cycle of doubt and fear started creeping back. I realized healing wasn't a straight line. It was more like a roller coaster with highs that lifted us and drops that nearly broke us. Around this time, my mom's condition worsened. Hospital visits, treatments, and the emotional toll made everything feel heavier. Emily and I leaned on each other during those dark days, finding strength in shared vulnerability. But the stress also brought tension. Small arguments turned into big fights, and sometimes we wondered if we could handle it all. One night, after a particularly tough day, Emily told me she was scared she'd lose herself in the pain and that maybe she needed space to figure out who she was. I wanted to be supportive, but it felt like a heartbreak wrapped in hope. I agreed to give her space, but I also promised to be there when she was ready. Those weeks apart were some of the loneliest I've ever experienced. I used therapy, journaling, and friends to keep myself grounded, but the silence between us was deafening. When we finally talked again, it was tentative but honest. We admitted fears, doubts, and hopes. It was like learning to speak a new language, one that required patience and empathy. Over time, those conversations grew deeper, and we started imagining a future that didn't erase the past but honored it. I still carry the weight of my biggest mistake every day. It's a scar, a lesson, and a reminder that life's fragility can't be taken for granted. But with Emily, I've learned that love is messy and complicated but also resilient and worth fighting for. I don't know what's next, but I'm here trying to be better, trying to hold on. Thanks for reading this far. More soon. The struggle to rebuild what was broken felt like trying to hold water in my hands. No matter how hard I tried, it slipped through the cracks. Emily and I were walking a tightrope, balancing between hope and doubt, love and resentment. Every day was a battle against old habits and fresh wounds. One day, Emily surprised me by suggesting we take a trip together. Not just any trip, but somewhere far away from the city, from the memories and the noise. She said we needed to find each other again, away from everything that reminded us of the past mistakes. We picked a small cabin near a lake, surrounded by trees and quiet. The idea of being alone together in the middle of nowhere was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. The drive there was silent at first, filled with a heavy kind of tension that neither of us knew how to break. But as we settled in, away from phones and distractions, something shifted. We talked, really talked, about our fears, our dreams, and the pain that had shaped us. For the first time in months, I saw the woman I'd fallen in love with, not just the shadow she'd become. But healing is never that simple. One night, after a long day of fishing and hiking, Emily broke down. She told me she still felt lost, that the weight of everything we'd been through was crushing her. I held her, wishing I could fix it all with a hug, but knowing that some wounds run too deep. That trip was a turning point. It didn't erase the past, but it gave us a chance to breathe, to reconnect, and to start building something new. Something fragile but real. When we returned to the city, we brought back a renewed commitment to each other. We started going to therapy more regularly, and I made a promise to myself to be present, to listen, and to never take Emily for granted again. But life, of course, had more surprises. One day, I got a call from my old boss saying that the company was downsizing and I was at risk of losing my job. The timing couldn't have been worse. The stress of possibly losing my livelihood added another layer to the already fragile state of my mind. I tried to keep it together for Emily, but I was slipping. During this time, Emily's support was both a lifeline and a reminder of how much I needed to change. One evening, after a long day of interviews and anxiety, I broke down completely. Emily didn't judge or criticize. She just held me and told me it was okay to be scared. That moment of vulnerability opened a new chapter in our relationship. It was proof that even in the darkest times, love can be a beacon. Slowly, we began to rebuild not just our relationship, but ourselves. I found a new job a few months later, and with it came a renewed sense of purpose. Emily and I kept working on us, knowing that the road ahead would be long and winding. I still carry the weight of my biggest mistake every day, but it no longer defines me. Instead, it fuels my determination to be better, to love deeper, and to cherish every moment. Thanks for sticking with me. There's more to come. Life never hands you easy answers, does it? Just when you start to think things might settle, the unexpected crashes back in, knocking you off balance and forcing you to rethink everything. After landing the new job, I thought the worst was behind me. That Emily and I were finally finding solid ground. But the scars from my biggest mistake were deeper than I realized, and they had a way of resurfacing when I least expected it. One afternoon, I was scrolling through social media when I saw a photo of Emily with someone else. Not a friend, not a family member, but a guy I'd never met. Something about the way they were standing close, laughing, made my stomach twist. My mind spiraled into overdrive. Was she moving on? Had she already given up on us? I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was being paranoid, but the doubt stuck like a splinter. That night, I asked Emily about the photo. She admitted the guy was a coworker who'd been helping her through some tough days at work. She assured me nothing was going on, but the seed of insecurity was planted. Over the next few weeks, I found myself checking her phone when she wasn't around, a habit I hated but couldn't break. It was a vicious cycle of suspicion and guilt. Emily noticed the change in me and confronted me one night, asking why I was acting like I didn't trust her. I broke down and confessed everything. The fear, the jealousy, the pain of the past. It was one of the hardest conversations we'd had, but also one of the most honest. We agreed to be more open, to share our feelings before they spiraled into suspicion. Around the same time, my mom's cancer treatment took a turn for the worse. The hospital visits became a regular part of my life, and Emily stood by me through every moment. Her strength surprised me and reminded me why I loved her. But the constant stress was wearing us thin. Arguments started popping up over the smallest things. Forgotten texts, missed calls, misread tones. It was like we were fighting battles from the past all over again. One night, after a particularly bad fight, I stormed out and drove aimlessly, trying to clear my head. I realized that I needed to confront not just the past mistakes but also my own fears and insecurities if I wanted to save what we had. Therapy became my anchor. I poured my heart out to my therapist, digging into why I couldn't let go of the past, why trust was so hard to rebuild. I realized it wasn't just about Emily or Rachel. It was about me, about learning to forgive myself and let go of control. Slowly, things started to shift. Emily and I began setting boundaries that helped us feel safer. We created new rituals, weekly dinners, phone-free evenings, honest check-ins, that rebuilt trust brick by brick. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. I still think about my biggest mistake every day. It's a shadow that follows me, but now it's one I've learned to face instead of run from. The road ahead is uncertain, but with Emily by my side, I'm ready to keep walking, keep fighting, and keep hoping. Thanks for reading this far. More to come. The deeper I dug into myself, the more I realized how much my biggest mistake wasn't just about the betrayal. It was about all the ways I'd been avoiding real connection. I'd spent years building walls, hiding fears, and pretending everything was fine until it all exploded. Therapy sessions peeled back those layers, forcing me to face parts of myself I'd long ignored. Emily and I kept pushing forward, but every step felt like walking through glass, fragile and painful. One afternoon, I got a call from an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. His voice was warm, familiar, and it felt like a lifeline. We met up, and talking to him reminded me of who I used to be before the mistakes and heartaches. That connection sparked something in me, a reminder that I wasn't defined by my worst moments but by how I chose to rise from them. Meanwhile, Emily was growing too. She started volunteering at a local shelter, pouring her energy into helping others. Watching her find purpose beyond our struggles was inspiring and reminded me that healing isn't just about fixing what's broken but about building something new. Our relationship wasn't perfect by any means. There were nights filled with silence, moments when doubt crept in, and times when we wondered if the past would always haunt us. But we kept showing up for each other, committed to the messy, imperfect work of love. Then came the unexpected twist. One day, Emily surprised me with tickets to a weekend getaway. A small cabin in the mountains, away from everything. It felt like a second chance, a fresh start. The trip was a mix of laughter, tears, and long conversations that stretched into the night. We shared fears we hadn't voiced before and dreams for the future. For a moment, it felt like we were reclaiming the love we thought we'd lost forever. But reality came rushing back when we returned. The pressures of life, work, and family didn't pause, and the weight of my mom's illness lingered heavily on us. Yet, through it all, we held on to each other, finding strength in vulnerability. I learned that forgiveness isn't a one-time act but a daily choice, a commitment to accept imperfection and keep moving forward. Looking back, I see how my biggest mistake shattered everything, but it also forced me to rebuild, to grow, and to love in ways I never thought possible. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm grateful for the journey and the chance to share it with you. Thanks for sticking with me. More coming soon. As time passed, I began to understand that healing wasn't about erasing the past but about learning to live with it differently. The mistakes, the betrayals, and the heartbreaks became part of my story, but they no longer defined me. Emily and I found new ways to connect, new rhythms to our days that brought us closer instead of pushing us apart. One of the biggest changes came when we decided to start volunteering together at a community center. It wasn't just about giving back, it was about rebuilding trust through shared purpose. Working side by side, helping others who were struggling with their own battles, reminded us that pain is universal but so is resilience. There were still rough days when the memories would hit hard and doubt would creep in. But those days became less frequent, replaced by moments of genuine joy and connection. One evening, after a particularly rewarding day at the center, Emily surprised me with a small celebration for my birthday. It wasn't extravagant, just a quiet dinner, a homemade cake, and laughter. It felt like a turning point, a sign that we were moving forward. Around the same time, I started journaling regularly. Writing became a way to process my feelings, to confront fears I hadn't dared to face aloud. Sometimes the words were raw and painful. Other times, they were filled with hope and gratitude. Sharing parts of those journals with Emily opened new doors for us, creating a space where honesty wasn't scary but healing. We also began planning a future that felt more real and attainable. Conversations about moving in together, about careers, and even about family started happening naturally. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Then, life reminded us that it never stops testing you. My mom's health took another downturn, and I found myself juggling hospital visits with work and relationship challenges. Emily stood by me unwaveringly, her support a steady anchor in the storm. Those difficult days deepened our bond and taught us about compassion and endurance. I won't lie, there were times I wondered if we'd ever fully escape the shadow of my biggest mistake. But now, it feels more like a chapter in our story rather than the whole book. Every day is a choice: to forgive, to trust, to love despite the scars. Writing this out has been cathartic, and I'm grateful for the chance to share it with all of you. Thanks for being here. More to come. There's this weird moment in every relationship where you realize that you're no longer just two people, but a complex web of shared histories, mistakes, and growth. For Emily and me, that moment hit hard. It wasn't a grand event or a big revelation, but a slow, steady realization that our biggest mistake had changed not just us individually but also what us even meant. We had days when the past crept in unexpectedly. A song on the radio, a scent in the air, a phrase said in passing, and it was like a crack opened up in our fragile peace. Those moments would hit hard, shaking us, reminding us that healing isn't about forgetting but about carrying those memories with a different weight. One night, after a long day, Emily and I sat on the couch, the silence between us thick but comfortable. She reached over and took my hand, and in that simple touch, I felt a connection that words couldn't capture. It was an unspoken promise to keep trying, keep loving, no matter how messy or complicated it got. We talked about the future, what we wanted, what scared us, and what we hoped to build. It wasn't all rosy. There were fears and doubts, but also a shared determination. Around this time, I started to reconnect with hobbies I'd abandoned years ago. Painting, writing, even trying to learn guitar. Those creative outlets became a way to express the emotions I struggled to verbalize. Emily encouraged me, and sometimes we'd spend evenings sharing our work, laughing at the awkwardness, and celebrating small victories. Our relationship wasn't perfect, and the shadow of my biggest mistake still loomed, but it was no longer a barrier. It was a bridge to deeper understanding. Then, out of nowhere, life threw another curveball. Emily's mother fell seriously ill, and suddenly, we were both navigating new roles as caregivers and supporters. The added stress tested our resilience but also brought us closer in unexpected ways. We learned to lean on each other, to communicate better, and to find moments of light even in the darkest times. Through all this, I realized that mistakes don't just break things. They can also build something new if you're willing to put in the work. Forgiveness became a daily practice, and love became less about perfection and more about commitment. Writing this story has helped me process so much, and I'm grateful to everyone who's read along. There's still more to share. Thanks for sticking with me. It's wild how life can throw you into the deep end when you least expect it, testing every ounce of your strength and will. Just as Emily and I thought we were settling into a rhythm of healing, another shock hit that nearly shattered everything. One evening, out of nowhere, I got a call that changed everything. My dad had been in a serious car accident. The news was sudden, brutal, and completely shook me to my core. I dropped everything and rushed to the hospital, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Seeing my dad, fragile and hooked up to machines, was a harsh reminder of how fragile life really is. It was a reality check that knocked the breath out of me and put all my past mistakes into perspective. Emily was there by my side, her hand steady in mine, offering a quiet strength that I desperately needed. The hospital stay was long and grueling, filled with moments of hope and despair. I saw a new side of Emily, resilient, compassionate, and fiercely loyal. That time together tested us in ways nothing else had. We navigated the logistics, the emotional roller coaster, and the uncertainty as a team. It was during those long nights in the hospital waiting room that we finally talked about everything. The past mistakes, the pain, the fear of losing each other. The raw honesty was painful but healing. We made promises to be better, to fight for each other no matter what. After my dad's condition stabilized, life didn't magically get easier, but we felt stronger somehow. The trauma had stripped away pretense and forced us to confront what truly mattered. We started planning small trips to escape the weight of daily stress, finding moments of joy in simple things like hiking, cooking together, or watching sunsets. The scars from my biggest mistake were still there, but they felt less like wounds and more like reminders of how far we'd come. At work, things improved too. My new job gave me stability and a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in a long time. I was finally able to balance my personal life and career without feeling overwhelmed. One night, as Emily and I sat on our tiny balcony, watching city lights flicker, She looked at me and said, "Maybe mistakes aren't the end of the story, they're just the beginning of a new chapter." Those words stuck with me, echoing everything I'd learned on this difficult journey. I'm not perfect. Far from it. But I'm learning to live with my mistakes, to grow from them, and to cherish the people who stay despite the mess. Thanks for following my story. There's one last part to go. Reaching this final part feels surreal. After everything, the mistakes, the heartbreak, the fights, the tears, and the slow, painful healing, I'm here, still standing, still learning, still hoping. The journey wasn't linear. It wasn't clean or pretty. It was a messy, tangled web of emotions that tested every part of me and Emily. Looking back, I realize my biggest mistake didn't just change my life. It changed who I am at the core. It forced me to confront my flaws, to face my fears, and to reckon with the consequences of my actions. But more importantly, it taught me about resilience, forgiveness, and the power of love, even when love feels fragile and broken. Emily and I aren't perfect. We still have hard days and moments of doubt, but we also have a commitment to each other that runs deeper than any mistake. We've learned to communicate honestly, to support each other's growth, and to hold space for the past without letting it control our future. The scars from my biggest mistake are still there, but they don't define me. They're a part of my story, a reminder of the lessons learned and the person I'm striving to become. As for advice to anyone going through something similar, don't be afraid to face the truth, no matter how painful. Healing starts with honesty about yourself, your partner, and your situation. It's okay to be broken. It's okay to stumble. What matters is the willingness to keep trying, to keep loving, and to never give up on the possibility of change. Sharing this story has been cathartic, humbling, and sometimes terrifying. But knowing that others might find hope or understanding in my experience makes it worth it. Life is unpredictable, full of mistakes and surprises, but it's also filled with second chances if we're brave enough to take them. Thanks for reading my story. I hope it helps someone out there find their way.